everyone, it's Shell from Scrap Secrets and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is part of my guest designer spot for Doodles Paper Playground, who makes sparkle blends. And we're going to be creating this shaker card using a cover plate die or a background die. So the two blends we're going to use are called Spooky Cake and Hey Ghoul Friend. This background die, the cover plate die, is from MFT. The purple paper is from a Hero Arts kit, and the pumpkin paper is from a loose leaf pack of paper that they had at Hobby Lobby. So we're going to be using a combination of distress inks and distress oxides to ink up or to color in some of these stamps from Kindred Stamps' Ghoul Friend set. So I picked the two females, and so it's a mouse and a duck, and we're going to be stamping them in Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink onto some Canson XL watercolor paper. So the reason I use Canson is because one, it's fairly inexpensive, and two, I seem to get really good results from it. Somebody had asked me how I was able to do a bunch of layers without the paper pilling. And I think the trick is to use watercolor pencils or distress inks and distress oxides, which is mainly what I use when I watercolor on Canson XL watercolor paper. The reason is I don't think you use as much water with these mediums as you do if you use regular watercolor. I'm not really great with regular watercolor, and I've always found that the paper will pill. But when you're using either distress inks or distress oxides or the watercolor pencils, I use the Derwent Inktense ones. I find that I tend to use less water, so it's more pigmented and it's easier to use. So on here, I am going to be using distress inks and distress oxides. I wish I had just stuck to all distress inks, because if you've never watercolor with distress oxides before, they are oxides for a reason. When you add water, it oxidizes it, so it gives kind of a chalky result. It was not exactly the result that I was going for here, but I kind of had already committed to it, so and I didn't think about it until afterwards, but I probably should have used all inks. So I am I'm not really doing any major techniques in this video, but I did leave some of the coloring in because some of you said that you liked to watch the coloring. So I'm just going in and adding a layer of color down. I let that dry. I move on to another area, and then I'll come back in. And one of the things that I don't do very well with distress inks, distress oxides, that I do better with the Derwent Inktense watercolor pencils is shading. I think I'm just a little bit more aware of it, and I think it's easier to shade with those. So because you can put both of the colors down at the same time and kind of blend them. You can do that too. You can put it on your mat or your slick surface with two different colors of distress ink or distress oxide and mix them there. But I don't think about doing that when I do this. So usually it's just kind of a one note coloring. So I do try here in a little bit, you'll see in a couple minutes, that I do try mixing some of the colors. So I'll put the lighter color down first, and I think I do 2 layers of it, and then I go back in with the darker color and add a little bit of shading, and then I'll go back with the lighter color and add one more layer of that to kind of blend out the line so it's not super harsh. So I'm using a Wilted Violet and then Villainous Potion. Villainous Potion is for the darker areas, for the shading. I am going in and adding some lines to her skirt as well as shading to where the darkest pieces are. And then you'll see I go back in with that Wilted Violet and kind of just buff out any of those harsh lines. I use Scattered Straw for the bristles of the broom. I do go back in and add some of the lines in there with the, I believe it's Ground Espresso, and that's Ground Espresso Distress ink. It's the same color that I do the handle in, and then I will use some Carved Pumpkin for the mouse's bow, Black Soot for her ears and the outer parts of her face, and then I use Antique Linen for her inside of her face. I will use some saltwater taffy for her mouth, and then I believe it's hickory smoke that I use for the interior of her mouth. I get a little bit of like the little shadow because it's going to be dark in there when you see her open mouth. So while I am coloring, I'll let you guys just watch, but I just thought that I would do a little bit of the craft and chat. So I have kind of a couple of funny Mila stories. So normally I pick her up, or I'm sorry, normally I drop her off at daycare once a week. So I love it. It's fun. It's a fun time. I get to, spend a little bit of time just in the car with just her. And she's a funny kid anyway. So she just makes me laugh. She'll say things and I'm like, where did you learn that? And she does have an older sister and then two older cousins that all four of them are super close. So it's most likely where she got some things from. But like I said, normally drop her off. So yesterday I had to pick her up. So I pick her up and they're outside on the playground and I'm yelling for her and she's not turning around. And so I walk a little closer and I finally call her name again and she turns around and she sees me and her face lights up. She runs over to me and she jumps into my arms and she gives me a big, big hug, the squeezy hugs that are just like the best hugs in the world. And then pulls back and looks at my face and goes, "Chick-fil-A." I'm like, I guess that's what we're having for dinner because the reason I was picking her up is my sister-in-law has back to school night and normally my sister-in-law would pick her up. My brother had month end and quarter close, so he had a lot of work to do at work. He was going to pick Nora up from school, so I was picking Mila up, and then we were going to come home and have dinner, and then he had a call at 7:30 at night, which is the time the kids had to go to bed. So that's what I was going over there for, was to put both of them to bed. So I'm like, I guess that's what we're having for dinner because I knew I wasn't cooking and he wasn't cooking because he was going to have work to do before that 7:30 call. So I take Mila off the playground, we go back, we get her backpack, and we're walking to my car, and she's holding my hand, and she looks at me and she said, "I thought Mommy was coming to get me." I said, "No, I was coming to get you." So we get back to the house, my brother comes back, we order Chick-fil-A, I go get it, we're sitting at the dinner table eating. And I was telling my brother that I said to Mila, I said, "Tell Daddy what you said when I picked you up." And she said, "Food." I said, "No, what specifically did you say?" And she said, "Chick-fil-A." So we were laughing about that. And I said, "Yeah." I said, and on the way out, she said, "I thought Mommy was picking me up." So my brother says, "Mila, Mommy told you last night. Grandpa told you this morning." So my sister-in-law's father took Mila to daycare Thursday morning. So took her, and said, "Aunt Shell's taking you home." My sister-in-law said that. And then my brother said in the morning, "Mila, Aunt Shell's taking you home and we're going to have Chick-fil-A for dinner." So what I'm now realizing is that all she heard was Chick-fil-A for dinner. And when she was being picked up, she associated me with Chick-fil-A. So the look on her face of like pure joy was really more for Chick-fil-A than the fact that I was there to pick her up and take her home. So my excitement of her being excited to see me was diminished when I realized she wasn't really happy to see me. She was more excited to know that she was having Chick-fil-A for dinner. So she's just super funny. And the things that like click in her head just make me laugh. So anyway, that was part of my day with Mila yesterday. So now we'll go back to the card. So I've colored in most of the mouse. I've gone in for the duck. And the only thing that I did really differently for that was I went in with some pumice stone and shaded around the white edges of the duck's face because when something is white, it still has some shadow. So I wanted to add a little bit of gray to that, but very, very light gray. I did add a lot of water to that to water it down. And then I went back in with a black marker, colored in the eyes because the paper does have some texture to it. So it didn't stamp perfectly. And then I'm going back over with a white gel pen to put the dots in the middle of the eye. On the mouse, that did not work. I will go back in with a Pitt pen and very carefully put small dots in there. The nib on the Pitt pen is a lot thicker than the gel pen, so just had to be really careful that it didn't take over the entire part of the eye. And then I was just going in to add some saltwater taffy for the tongue for the mouse. Added a little bit, I think, of black soot. I think that's what it is. But again, watered it down, just did one layer of it to kind of have like a gray in the middle of the mouth. Added some of the blue, which I believe it was the tumbled glass. I used tumbled glass and speckled egg, and I believe it was tumbled glass that I used for the duck's eyeshadow. And, it kind of really did the same technique with all of the coloring. And then I fussy cut them all out, used a marker around the edges to kind of get rid of the white core of that paper. Now I'm going in with a Spectrum Noir sparkle pen to add sparkle to the veil on the duck's hat and some of the duck's outfit and the bow on the mouse. So that's pretty much it for the coloring. Like I said, I did leave a lot of the watercoloring in there, but I wanted you guys to be able to see it. I also wanted to be able to do a little bit of a craft and chat. So as far as the blends, you're going to notice that I do something totally opposite of what I normally do. I'm just dumping in the blend. This is the Spooky Cake, and I am dumping it in there. What I decided to do this time was to pick the colors for my card around the sparkle blends rather than doing it the other way around. Normally I do the card and pick all the colors and then pick which sparkle blend I want to use. So for the Hey Ghoul Friend, the only thing that I did pick out of there are there's some clear ghosts, and I didn't really want a ton of them in there, so I took most of those out. I am using the Sparkle Blends Sparkle Stick, and you see that is available in the shop. So make sure you check it out. It's not just sparkle blends that they have. They do have other things. You'll also see me use acetate in a couple minutes, and I am down to like one of my last sheets of the Sparkle Blend acetate. So I am going to line the back of that pumpkin piece that we cut out from the paper from Hobby Lobby. I'm going to cut it down to size, and then we are going to glue it into place with some Honeybee Bee Creative glue. We're going to go down the middle and then around the sides. And initially I thought that I was going to be able to have some scraps, and I was initially going to do 2 different shaker windows on there. And then I decided no, because the pieces weren't long enough. So I'm just going to use one of my last pieces of full sheets of acetate to cover this whole entire thing. So once I've glued it down, I make sure that none of the glue has seeped out, kind of go through and take off any fingerprints. And now I'm using my Big Mama roll of foam tape. I'm going to cut the strips in half. These strips are a little bit larger than most of the shaker cards that I do, so sometimes I cut them down into halves or thirds, depending on the size of the frame around the object that I am putting the foam around. You will see that I have a couple pieces that I'll put in the middle. I'm actually going to remove those because my initial plan was to have, like I said, those 2 different shaker windows. But since I decided against that and just did the full piece, I wasn't thinking, and I put some foam tape down in the middle. I do remove that. I do 2 layers of the foam just so that it's thick enough and there's enough room for the shaker pieces to shake, and if anything kind of gets doubled up, like one over the other, it will still be able to shake. So once I've done that, before I pour the shaker bits in, I'm going to take my brush with some light kaolin clay and run over the edges, because if there are pieces of tape that the bottom might cut a little thicker than the top, some of the adhesive may be exposed, and I don't want the sequins or the sparkle blends to get trapped on any of that. So once that's done, I pour in the mix, and then I take off the tape on the back of it, and I am going to take that metallic, or that kind of like shiny purple piece of cardstock and place it over top. So I cut it 1/4 of an inch larger than the card front. And I'm just going to try to do my best to make sure it's kind of evenly spaced on all of the edges. And once I'm happy with that, I'm pressing that all down. And then I'm going to use that same Be Creative glue from Honeybee Stamps and put it all over the back of the 2 images that I fussy cut out and place them on the card. I wanted to also have a sentiment. I thought I was going to have it on the front, but I end up not doing that. I wanted it to say, "Hey, ghoul friend." The stamp set from Kindred Stamps has the Ghoul Friends sentiment. So what I decide to do is I'm going to make my own sentiment. I'm going to use MFT's stamp, I believe it's called Connected, and take the letters to spell hey. And then I'm going to take the Ghoul Friends sentiment, place it down onto this purple piece of cardstock, mask off the S at the end of Ghoul Friends, and use that same Lawn Fawn jet black ink to ink it up, with the exception of the S because that's covered with the backer piece. Take the backer piece off, stamp it down, and it's stamped really well the first time. And then get ready to stamp the hey on top of it. So what I found works the best spacing wise is to take the middle letter and center that, and then stamp the other letters on each side of them just to make sure that it's centered. Because if you start all the way from the left and work right, sometimes your letter spacing gets messed up, but you know at this point that the middle letter will be centered. So that's what I'm going to do, stamp down the E and then the H and then the Y. And then you have your own custom phrase that you can use for your cards. So because I didn't want it to be the plural, I just masked off that S. So you could have cut it off. I know that I've done some stamp surgery on some of my stamps, but it was just the letter S, and I didn't want to do that because I probably will use it as a full phrase at some point for another card. So I'm taking a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch black card base, opening it up and using that same Honeybee glue to glue on the back of the purple piece, sticking it down to the inside of my card. And then the last thing I have to do is glue the shaker piece to the front of it. So put the same glue down and attach it to the front. So that's the card for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have comments or questions, please feel free to leave them below. And I will see you guys real soon for another video. Bye!